What's up, everybody? It's Dan, Binder Boneyard, coming at you from the office. And what a difference a week makes. Last week it was cold and gross and gray. This week, today, this is Saturday, March 1st, when I'm recording this. It is beautiful outside, 70 degrees, sunny, bluebird skies. It is, it's what people move to Central Oregon for, among other things. But anyways, gorgeous day. Hopefully it is nice where you're at. I have seen some weather moving across the country, but yeah, very nice here. So yes, hopefully it's nice where you're at. I appreciate everybody listening. Thank you for the YouTube listens. Thank you for everyone that likes and subscribes and shares. And shout out to our friends, the Lampkins, for listening. And Sierra, I appreciate you very much. Thank you. So yeah, everybody, I appreciate all of you. And again, if anybody's sponsoring the show, let me know, because I'm not seeing any money out of it. But yeah, I've been getting a lot of requests for some more technical type episodes. So I figured if you're looking for high quality entertainment, probably should scroll on to the next podcast. But if you need some good tech, this one's good for you. We're going to be talking about brakes, more specifically, well, probably all around, but a lot of brake line, brake hose, brake things like that. There's a lot of, well, like I said in last week's podcast, there's things that get overlooked because they're not sexy. Wiring is the last thing that gets done in a restoration, if it gets done at all. And brakes, believe it or not, are one of those things too. They're one of the most important, obviously, but for some reason they get overlooked the most as well. There's, especially if you're in the Midwest, brake lines, and that's what I'm going to differentiate a little bit here. So brake hoses are generally the flexible piece, from the frame down to the wheel cylinder or axle or whatever. Some C-Series trucks have a short brake hose that runs from the hard line coming off of the master cylinder to the junction block on the frame, and then, there it transfers to hard line. So if I say brake line, a lot of times most of the time I'm trying to refer to the hard metal line that, runs down the frame or comes out of the master cylinder or is on the rear axle. Or if it's a Scout 80, it's on the front axle, things like that. And then when I say brake hose, I'm referring to the actual rubber or steel braided flexible piece that attaches to the wheel. So I see, these Midwestern trucks where the brake lines are rusty, like real rusty, and guys will splice in stuff, they'll reflare a sectional line and splice in there and keep it going. Or the brake hoses, they're cracked, dry rotted, pulling out on an end because maybe they put a lift kit on, and rather than buy new hoses, they drop the bracket to, they bend the hard line down, and then that way the factory rubber line is not stretched too tight. You see that a lot with the Scouts, especially a guy will do a 4-inch lift with the, lift shackle setup, and the rear brake hose will be stretched to the limit just at ride height. And, people overlook that stuff. So it's important that when you're doing any kind of lift kit or restoration or whatever, like, you don't overlook those parts. And of course, use your head. If you replaced a brake hose 3 years ago, you're probably still all right. If you have original brake hoses from 1973, probably should replace them. It's just, especially if you're doing a restoration or resto mod. So there's a lot of variation in that stuff as well. The two common brake line sizes are 3/16 and quarter. And so to differentiate, for 3/16, you would use a 3/8 line wrench to undo the nuts on the wheel cylinders or down the frame. And if they're 1/4 inch, you would use a 7/16 wrench or line wrench for those nuts. The only part where that doesn't apply is at like the master cylinder or junction block, where for some reason, I don't know why, they use gigantic, 9/16, like 9/16, 18 nuts with a 3/16 line. Like why they have this giant nut and this little line, I don't know. But that's how a lot of them are. And, most master cylinders are that way. You'll have a 9/16 port and a 1/2 inch port. And that's probably so you don't mix up which line goes where. But yeah, it's one of those things. I don't know why they do it that way, but those are the two lines generally found for brake lines. And then that drives what brake hoses you get, because of course you need to have a brake hose with that thread into it. Where you start to get confusing is with the rubber hoses, especially with drum brakes. Some rubber hoses screw straight into the wheel cylinder, and those are 7/16 20 thread. And they use a copper sealing washer. But all of the flare hardline, those nuts that are 1/4 inch, those are 7/16 24. So you get guys that are trying to thread, because some wheel cylinders, like, if you don't get the right wheel cylinders, if your, Napa sells you the wrong thing, or who knows what, but brakes are one of the most commonly misordered part. I don't know why. It's just there's so many different variations. It happens all the time. But you'll get a wheel cylinder and then you'll try to thread your hose into it and it won't go in, and then you realize, oh, this has got a tapered seat in it, so it's for a hard line. So that's the 7/16 24, so they won't thread in. So that's something to look for, and that's why I always tell people, when they're trying to figure out what brake parts they need, really your best bet is take the part off and take it into the parts store. And that way you can match it, either by pictures on their catalog, or, if they have one on the shelf, you can match it up and be certain that you're getting the right part, because that really, man, that happens a lot, especially with Rock Auto. Facebook, the forums on Facebook are just full of guys like, hey, I ordered wheel cylinders for my 1100 and nothing fits and they don't bolt in, but Rock Auto says that they're the ones I need. What do I need? And it's like, if you'd have called one of us, a light line vendor or an IH shop that knows what's going on, like us or IH Parts America or something like that, like, we could help head you off these problems. And, people are attracted to Rock Auto because a wheel cylinder will be $4.50 and, $10 to ship it. And then, hopefully it's the right one. And, then they brag about how they did brakes on their truck for, they did their entire truck for $28. And, good job. But brakes are definitely not one of those places I would skimp on parts and pieces. I mean, I've been in too many situations towing and bad weather, whatever, where, brakes are really important. And the last thing you want to do is rely on, the cheapest parts you can buy. I don't know, and there's an argument about quality there, and who, are the expensive ones really that much better? And that's a whole different podcast. And, I'm sure there's been some other channels that have done some tests about that sort of stuff. But anyways, you really, there's some benefit to calling an IH shop and really nailing down exactly what you need. So yeah, it's just important that you take those parts into the parts store, match up what you need. Same goes for hoses. Take that hose in, make sure that both ends are correct, make sure it's got the little slot in it for the clip to grab, or the nut. If it's got the, it's really common on the 60s and early 70s trucks to have that big 5/8 nut on the end of on the brake hose that it secures it to the frame or to the body if it's an early Scout. So what I'll see a lot of times is you'll buy replacement lines and then they won't be threaded. They'll have a clip that goes on there, but the clip doesn't really hold it quite the same way that the big nut does. So I try to stick with the style that you took off. And then the other part of that too is if you're upgrading, for example, IH pickups, they had a 1/4-inch brake line for the front of the truck. And then of course the hose is threaded right into those and whatever. But GM, if you're running, if you switch to a Chevy front axle with the disc brakes, they use a 3/16 hard line. So, you can't really put the GM flexible brake hoses on your international hardline because the GM is set up for 3/16. The IH is 1/4. So I think there's some brass adapters out there you might be able to find. Maybe. I haven't had good luck with it. So what you do is either you can call Crown, or I think even IH Parts America makes brake hoses that are 1/4-inch on one end and GM disc brake caliper on the other. Or what we do here to eliminate the need for custom one-off parts is we replumb the front of the truck in 3/16 hardline. That way, when you're buying parts in the future for your truck, the whole, if you're doing a Chevy conversion, then everything's Chevy. Chevy brake lines, Chevy calipers, Chevy whatever. It's all Chevy. I know, blasphemy. God, I'm going to hell for saying all that. But it's just the easiest. It's the best way to make it for the future. Conversion brake lines might buy you some time now, but in the long run, having that, replumbing it is just the way to go. And so getting back to you guys in the East, Midwest and the East Coast and whatnot, stainless brake lines was the rage for quite a while, and even coated, electroplated brake lines were what everybody was using up until probably the last, 8 years. A product called NiCop, N-I, capital C-O-P, which is short for nickel copper, brake lines came out, and those are pretty much revolutionizing the brake stuff. I mean, at least it was. I don't know. We use it and we have great luck with it. But it's soft. It is easy to bend and manipulate how you need it. They're kind of a copper color, so it looks neat. It just is a nice contrast with other stuff that you're building. Some people think that you're just running copper line, which is not cool. But, this is not straight copper. This is nickel copper. So it's corrosion resistant. It's pressure. It's got a very high burst strength. And It flares really nice. If you've got the old double flaring tool, which if you're doing your own brake lines, you're gonna need that. So jump off onto that real quick. The double flaring tool is super important. They make a lot of different versions. There's like the mechanical kind that you put in a vise and you put the line and you put the ferrule on, or the nut, which everybody forgets. Like, before you go to make your line double flare, don't forget the nut and put it on the right way. I countless times. I mean, I just did it 3 days ago. I was in a hurry, going fast, forgot to put the nut on. So it happens with the best of us. But I'm just saying, like, really be methodical in how you lay it out and put that nut on there so it does not get forgotten about. So there's a kind of flaring tool that, like, you put in a vise and then it's got a big lever on it, and you like crunch down in the first position and then you rotate the dial and then you crunch down again. I think it's a Eastwood. I think that's an Eastwood model, and it's renamed under other things. And then there's the hydraulic kind. They have like an anvil and an arbor on the end of it, depending on what size brake line you're trying to do. And then you pump it up because it's hydraulic, and it'll do the flare, the double flare. Single flare is not safe for brakes. You have to do the double flare, which double flare just means it takes the end of the line and folds it in on itself, so that, and then it folds it in at like a 37-degree taper. So then when you tighten the nut down, the sealing surface between the, the taper, the seat in the wheel cylinder or brake hose, and then the nut that you remember to put on before you flared it, drives that flare, that double flare, right into the corresponding seat in the wheel cylinder or brake line. So then when you tighten that nut down real tight, because there's 2 layers of material, because it's been folded over onto itself and then made at a 37-degree angle, that's the double flare part. You have double the thickness of the material in there. So when you tighten that nut down, you're not going to split it. You're not going to break it. It's not going to crumple or do something weird. Whereas with a single flare, you'll run it in there and then it'll split the end or not seal like it's supposed to, or be too thin and not seat like it needs to. So that's what the point of the double flare is. So it's very important. And I'm not going to talk about these, European bubble flares and that sort of stuff, because we're not seeing it. In the internationals, it's strictly double flare, 37-degree taper. I'm almost certain it's 37 degrees. And that's just how it is. So that's what we're focusing on. And most of the old 70s cars were that way. American cars and trucks were that way. So anyway, so the NICOP line is really nice for bending, for laying out in a truck. You can buy, 25-foot roll of it on Amazon for $15. It comes from Taiwan. There's not much you can do about that. I'm not sure if anybody makes it in America, which is unfortunate, but that's just the nature of how it is these days. So rather than buy something pre-made from Taiwan, at least just buying it bulk and making it here ourselves is a little bit better, I guess. I don't know. But anyway, some of the ones on Amazon come with assortment of tube nuts, which I highly recommend. If you're looking for the hardline, don't just buy the roll with no nuts or anything like that, because now you're going to the parts store trying to buy tubing nuts individually, which good luck with that if you don't have a very experienced counter guy or girl that really knows their way around a catalog. So my recommendation is to buy the kind that have the nuts included. I think the one that we use is called 4 Lifetimes or 4 Lifetime, all one, like the letter 4, number 4, and then Lifetimes, all one word. is what I've been buying lately. They're steel nuts. They're the correct sizes, and it comes with the 9/16. It comes with the half, some quarters, and then the 3/8 or 3/16. Depending on the size of line you're getting, but they still send you all of those various sizes, which is really handy to have. And it's the same price as some of the other ones that are just coming as tubing. So that's what I use here. I haven't had any problems with it yet. It's just really nice to work with. After doing stainless line for so long, like that stainless line is super unforgiving. If you bend the wrong place, wrong way, wrong direction, like there's no bringing it back. It's like that piece is ruined and you have to start over. Whereas with the NICOP, you can't do like big, like if you put a 90 in it and then realize the 90 is the wrong way, it's really hard to straighten it back out and then bend it another direction and make it look right. Cause it'll be all wrinkly or weird looking. But if you bend a 90 and it needed to be 110, then you can go a little farther. Or if you bend a 90 and it needs to be 15 degrees off to one side, you can just rotate the line and you're pretty good. You try to get to where you can bend it without having to do that. I use a piece of wire. I use a piece of wire that, I bend it to the shape of what the line needs to do. And then I try and duplicate that shape with the hard line as I'm, flare the end, put the nut on, and then, that's backwards. Put the nut on, then flare the end, then start your bending. Generally, when you're starting from scratch with a brand new straight piece, you can slide the nut on from the end that you didn't flare yet. But if you, start making bends and then realize you forgot the nut, then you're in trouble. So anyway, just make sure that nut's on there. But generally I bend the tubing to match the wire that I made. And then when you fit it in there, you can make some adjustments here and there and figure out where your clamps are going to be and all that. Works out pretty well, for the most part. You try not to eyeball it too much until you get pretty good at it. Once you've done 8 or 10 trucks, then you kind of get a feel for which direction stuff bends, which way it goes, which end to start at, that kind of stuff. And it's like anything, it is a acquired skill. It's not something that you'll just be able to knock out overnight. It'll take you some time, but at least with the Amazon line kits, they're 25 footers. Usually the rolls are 25 feet. So that is enough to do a whole scout, usually. So if you have if you're only doing the front half of the truck and you mess up something, you usually have some leeway. But yeah, I just enjoy using that stuff. It works well. The other flaring tool that I didn't mention that I will bring up right now is the flaring tool that our grandparents used, which is the split bar style. It's, solid, like a 1x1 square with a associated square block that has a couple of wing nuts or something that clamps down on the line. And then you have like a U-shaped horseshoe type. I can't even describe it. It's got a threaded rod in it with the 37-degree wedge built into the end of it. And there's these little dies that you put in the end of the tubing, and then you squish it down with the U-shaped anvil driver thing, and then take your die out. And then when you drive the anvil back in, then that puts the remaining taper on the 37-degree taper on the end of the flare. That's all I use here. I'm very old school like that. Doing it that way lets me look at it closely. I can really inspect it to make sure that it's flaring the way it's supposed to, and that the seat has a nice, clean, perfect taper. Some of these mechanical or hydraulic ones that are really fast, you can't see the process until it's done. And if you've got a bad, a little burr or something is stuck in your flare, you won't know it until the end. And then it may not seal up when you go to tighten it down on the wheel cylinder or brake hose. So, but that bar style is also probably the most awkward and hardest to use. Like 99% of what we do loose, like out on the floor or on a bench, and it's pretty easy. But if you're under a truck and you're trying to do a repair, or you've routed all of your hose and your line, and then you're at the junction and you're trying to flare it at the junction, it's definitely a little unwieldy. But, it's what happens sometimes, because I try really hard to make all of the brake lines in a single run. Very, 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 very rarely does a long run get a splice in it. It's just the less splices you have, the less connections you have, the less leaks you're going to have, or potential for leaks. So that's why I do it that way. Because it just looks cleaner. It's just, it's going to be better. Just like wiring. Like, I make sure I do everything I can to make sure that the wire runs from the fuse panel all the way to its function, whether it be tail light or whatever, with no breaks, no plugs, no junctions, just straight wire. That way it rules out any kind of chance for disconnect or corrosion or something like that. It just makes diagnostics in the future better. It makes for a longer lasting product. Because junctions have been the Achilles heel of every manufacturer for as long as they've been doing it. Firewall plugs, things like that. It's another place for problems. And so when I'm doing these brake lines, I really try to make them in one shot. That way it's just better that way. So, anyway, that's pretty much the gist of it. And that stuff applies from trucks from the 40s all the way till, 1980 Scout. Like, if you've got a 56 S120 and you've got the crazy under the floor master cylinder with your brake lines going right into the big junction at the end of the master cylinder, it's still the same. You might have a banjo bolt that goes through the center of that, but you still have a flared line and everything that leads from there. So, this sort of stuff applies to everybody that has hydraulic brakes. So hopefully that made sense. Hopefully, you're not asleep. And if you are, wake up, because it's time to get back to work. If you have any other questions, you know how to get a hold of me through all the socials. Please like, share, subscribe, tell a friend, send money, send help, send sandwiches. And until next time, I'm Dan from Binder Boneyard.